Hello there, I'm Mary Myatt, and I'm delighted to be sharing some thoughts with you on the curriculum. So one of the things we need to be asking ourselves is the extent to which the curriculum that we're offering our pupils and students is ambitious. So it's a big thread of the way we think about curriculum provision and thinking here about how we make things quite demanding for our children, but we also provide appropriate support. So it's quite useful to start with what children themselves say. And in the work that I've been doing, it can be summed up by saying, well, they enjoy doing demanding work. They say, we'd like demanding work, please. So I've got a couple of examples. First, from a secondary context, but it applies, I think, across the sector. So I was working in a school in London, and I'd been asked by the school to talk to some pupils that they'd identified as being high prior attaining, but underachieving, able but idle. And so I sat down and I spoke to these pupils, and I was trying to find out whether there was any subject, any lessons where they were not messing around, because they weren't learning and they were also stopping others from learning as well. And in this school, it turned out it was geography. So I said, well, what's going on in geography then? That means you're doing your best work and you're letting others get on. And they said, well, our teacher just gives us really interesting, difficult material to work with, to talk about, to read and to discuss. So for instance, for homework, she'll give us articles to read from publications like the National Geographic. And she'll say to us, now your job for homework is to read this. Now you're not going to understand it all, but that's all right, because at the start of the next lesson, we're going to talk about what you did understand and what you didn't understand. So when I was in that teacher's classroom later that day, she had the same high expectations for all the pupils, regardless of their starting points. And when I checked the results for geography in that school, in a very high performing school, they were the highest by a margin. Now that teacher didn't give those children difficult, demanding work above their pay grade in order to get great results. The great results follow from really stretching children and supporting them to get there. So if you'll notice, she said, you won't understand it all, but that's all right, because we're going to talk about it at the start of the next lesson. So what we could say about how we offer children demanding work is it needs to be high challenge, but it needs to be accompanied by low threat. We need to reassure them that they don't need to have all the answers, because we're going to talk about it. So we might want to think about this and say, well, I'm in a primary school, or I don't teach geography in a secondary school. Could we take that insight and just see what happens when we offer children demanding work above their pay grade and then talk about it? So the next example is from primary, and here we've got an extract from Alison Peacock's book Assessment for Learning Without Limits, which came out in 2015. And she and a colleague are interviewing some children as they go in from year 5 into year 6. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to find out what the children think of ability tables. But actually, the children are talking about how much challenge they have, how ambitious the materials are that they work with. So this is what they had to say. The first day the children were back, we asked them what they thought of ability groups. The answers were astounding. The more able loved it. They enjoyed being the bright ones and having special challenges set by the teacher. The middle group were annoyed they didn't get the same work and challenges as the other group. They wanted to try harder work, but they'd worked out they'd never be moved up because there were only 6 seats on the top table. The less able were affected the most. They felt dumb, useless. They thought they'd never be allowed challenges, as they usually work with a teaching assistant. And this less able group liked the sound of some of the challenges the top group had, but they knew they would never get the chance. So what we've got here is the rationing of interesting, demanding work when children are saying that they would enjoy it. And so we've got to rethink about how we offer children work and how we support them to get there, rather than predetermining what we think they're capable of. So I'm going to turn now to how we weave this thread of ambition, which is a strong theme in the way that we're talking about the curriculum now, and think about it in the way that we refer to individual subjects. So one of the things we might ask ourselves, well, why teach this subject? So the answer seems to be more important that we talk about why it's important children are learning this subject rather than just because we want them to do well in their SATs or other examinations. This is kind of a bigger question about curriculum for children that goes beyond formal testing. And the underlying thread here again is the extent to which we can say it is ambitious. So there are three questions we might ask ourselves. The first is, what's the big picture for this subject? What are the big ideas in the subject? And then what's magical about it? What's unique about the individual subjects? And then why is it important? So a way to reframe this is to think, well, what would happen if our children came to school and they weren't taught a particular subject? What would happen if they came to school and they weren't taught any design technology or music or maths or geography? That then starts helping us to say, well, it's important because, and it helps us to increase the way that we think about the importance and significance and the ambition we have for all our pupils as we teach them the individual subjects. So one of the ways to help us do this is to draw on some quotes. So I've just got here a sample of quotes for each of the national curriculum areas. And I'm just going to look at history. And this is a quote from Marcus Garvey, who says, "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." So if we're teaching history, do we agree with that quote? It's fine not to, but we need, I think, to have our own justification and rationale for why this subject is important. So what I've done is I've just created quotes, drawn down quotes that reflect each of the national curriculum subjects. And some schools have found these quite helpful. If you want to download them, they're available free to download those from the resources, where I've got an extended film and the resources that go with it and contain these quotes, and that's on Myatt & Co under curriculum intent. They're free to download. So I'm going to turn now to some of the headlines from the research that can help us as we think about being ambitious for all our pupils. So just some brief thoughts. So the first one is from Peter Brown, and he and his colleagues, Roediger and McDaniel, in their book, Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning, have said that in order for learning to be secure, we need to put some effort into it, right? If we make things too easy, then the learning will not be long lasting. But that's okay, because we've already found that children are happy to do difficult stuff as long as it's accompanied by low threat. We've got a similar insight from Dan Willingham from his book here, Why Don't Students Like School? One of his insights is that human beings are curious, but thinking is hard. So when we're thinking about curiosity, what some schools are doing is they're saying, to what extent does our curriculum provoke curiosity? It's quite a nice lens through which to look at what we're offering our children, but thinking is hard. I think there's some parallels here with physical work, that we all know what it's like when we've done some housework or some gardening, or we've been for a run or something physical. And when we first get going, it can often feel a little bit sticky, don't really want to do it. And then we get into the flow. And then as we finish and after we finish, we feel great. We're absolutely buzzing with having done some exercise. And I think it's the same with thinking work, cognitive work, intellectual work that we're offering our children. It's deeply rewarding when we put some effort in. So I think it's our job as teachers to support them as we take them into these interesting places. So another insight from Dan Willingham is the importance of concepts. Okay, so we're going to know more and remember more if we understand the big idea or the concepts behind it. And the reason for that is because concepts act as holding baskets for a lot of information. So if I understand a concept, say in history, about democracy, and I've been learning about ancient Greece with my teacher, if later on we're then learning about Magna Carta, that too would be underpinned by the concept of democracy. So I can begin to make some comparisons between the similarities and differences underpinning those two different aspects of democracy because I've got the concept. So this is helpful for children's learning, but it also makes our planning easier when we identify the concepts, because there's plenty of them, but there aren't too many. And so part of our job as we're thinking about the curriculum is to identify those concepts. The The other thing is that the concepts quite often are tier 3 vocabulary, and we're very keen to develop children's vocabulary. So it's quite helpful if we pay attention to these concepts, these big words, and give them plenty of opportunities to talk about them, think of examples, and to use them in their own work. This is taking them to a deep place as far as their learning is concerned. Now, sometimes people say, well, I'm not sure where to start and where to find the big concepts and the big ideas. And so one of the starting points is the national curriculum documents. So the tendency is to go straight to the detail of what needs to be taught across a key stage. But actually, the importance statements are really helpful here because they lay out the significance and the purpose and the point of teaching these subjects, and they also contain some of the big ideas. So we find civilization, democracy, as we've already mentioned, in history, migration, land formation, geological records, etc., in geography. So we can start to pull those out to make sure that we are teaching them explicitly and helping children to make connections when we find the concepts. They're really helpful for us in our planning. Over time, we don't do it all at once. We identify what those concepts are and make sure that we're teaching them explicitly. And then a further insight from Dan Willingham is that our brain's privileged story. Our brain's privileged story. So we know more and remember more when we've heard it within a story or a high quality narrative. So it's kind of common sense, but I don't think it's really used as much as it might be when we're thinking about the curriculum beyond English in secondary and literacy in primary. So if we want to convey more to our children, it's really helpful to find a high quality text. So when Dan Willingham is talking about story and our brain's privileging story, he doesn't just mean novels, he doesn't just mean fairy tales or poetry, or I would argue also picture books, which tell a story, but any high quality text is going to mean that we know more and we remember more. So part of our work, I think, as we take on board this insight and we want to be ambitious for our children, is we identify some stories that are going to help us as we deliver the curriculum to our pupils. So they matter because they can give us the big picture. So part of our work as we're developing the curriculum is to find some high quality texts, if we agree with this insight from the cognitive science, that are going to provide the big picture or the background to what we're teaching. Now, this is important because knowing some background, the hinterland, as Christine Council calls it, helps us to understand new knowledge and to make connections. So there's a lot of evidence that if we've got a bit of background knowledge and then we're asked to look at something in more detail, our learning and our insights are going to be sharper and swifter. So that's why a high quality narrative can actually do that for us. And then they contain complex ideas, such as the concepts. A high quality text will have lots of lovely concepts in them. So when we're thinking about, well, I want to convey some concepts to my children, often if we found a good text, we'll spot them. I've got some examples in a moment. And then a high quality text will enrich children's vocabulary. So the reason for this is that the written word is generally more dense, more sophisticated, contains bigger words, and quite often those tier 3 vocabulary, and also sentences of greater lexical depth and complexity. It's just tighter, generally a high quality text. So what is helpful for us as teachers, if we want to develop children's vocabulary and their insights into high quality prose, high quality text can do that. And then the final reason is that a good text is inclusive. So every child can access a high quality text, even if they're not following it along. If they're hearing it read aloud, it's going to do them enormous good. There's a lot of evidence for that. So what I'm arguing from this is if we're really serious about a high quality, ambitious curriculum, when we're working up new models, we underpin them by high quality text. And so I've got a few examples here. as we remind ourselves that children enjoy doing demanding work. This is very helpful that they're saying this, because it means we can ramp up what we offer them. So I'm looking here at thinking about teaching the year 6 unit in science on evolution. Okay, so I'm going to underpin it by a high quality text. So the one I've selected is by Sabina Radeva, Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species. Now, I've got some confidence that this is going to be a good text, a powerful text to use with my class, because Sabina trained as a scientist and then she retrained as an artist. And so when I'm thinking about using text, the key thing I'm after is that there's important information in there for my pupils, that the prose doesn't talk down to them, it treats them as intelligent human beings, and also that the images are beautiful. Okay, so those are my criteria: good quality information, well written, and it looks lovely. There's plenty of stuff out there that doesn't do that, but this does, I think. So I'm just looking at the images there. I think they provoke curiosity. The children are going to want to get in and find out more because of this. So that's one strand in terms of the image. But the second strand is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, because I've got some lovely language in here: geological record, sediment, extinct. So these are important things for children to know as they grapple with the theory of evolution. So instead of it just being random words, either up on a wall or on a board, it's embedded within a text, and then we can do something really meaningful with it. Now, the other thing about a high quality text is that, such as this one, is that they'll identify quite often some of the things that can go wrong. So if I don't have a background in science, which I don't, and I'm intending to teach this, it means that someone has already identified some of the pitfalls, such as the misconception that evolution proves that we evolved from monkeys. So lots of people think this. It's quite useful to be able to nail this within our lessons. So these could be really useful prompts for teaching children as we find out more. A few more examples. So a unit on Key Stage 1, Great Fire of London. I'm just looking at this lovely text, beautiful illustrations. And again, the text contains some really rich language that I'm going to share with my pupils so that their learning is deeper as they find out about the Great Fire of London. So my argument is that there's a high quality text in every part of the curriculum, and it's our job as teachers to find them, and we need to be given the time to find them. So that means, making sure that we're not overloaded with other aspects of school work that mean we don't have time to do this, because if we want to take children deep, this is important work. So I'm just going to share a few examples now. So History of Art, wonderful book for primary, David Hockney and Martin Gayford's work. Gombrich's Little History of the World. This was written for undergraduates going up to university to read history. About 60 years or so ago, but I've used it for year 8, giving children extracts from this book as we were learning about ancient Greece. Now, I've also had colleagues using it in year 5. So the thing about really well-written prose is that it's very accessible, and we can take it across the stages and phases of our children, and we'll decide for ourselves whether we think that it's appropriate for them. Quite often people say that there aren't any stories in maths. There are masses of stories in maths. So there's one example here, Alex's Adventures in Numberland. Suitable for RE, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Richard Feynman's 6 Easy Pieces in Physics, Carlo Rovelli's 7 Brief Lessons on Physics. I think this could go down into Upper Key Stage 2. Some of these chapters, really, really beautifully written. Wonderful for geography, opening up the landscape, the background to different parts of the world by Michael Palin. If we're thinking about the Inspector Calls at Key Stage 4, a really good book would be Ian Baruma's Year Zero, which is an account of the conditions in 1945 at the end of World War II. Pretty desperate for most people around the world, and really good background if we're teaching an Inspector Calls. And then Amanda McWash's work, she's the CEO of the Chartered College of Teaching, of the CEO, apologies, for Christian Haidt, and she responds to this question, but where are you really from? So this would be suitable for PSHE, upper key stage 2 into key stage 3, citizenship, RE, English, probably get some geography from there as well. So it's about finding these high quality texts that can do the heavy lifting for us as we think about an ambitious curriculum. So just to wrap this bit up, that I've taken this idea of using text across a primary school in relation to geography. And so I've chosen a text that could be used. It's actually a poem from Shirley Hughes's Out and About. So we start in early years, not because they're following the national curriculum, but because lots goes on there that they're going to draw on later as they go through primary school and into secondary. So in this way of thinking, I'm tapping into some ideas and concepts in geography about land formation, about geological formation, about volcanoes and that sort of thing. That's what we want to tap into through this work. So we're starting with early years, and then in key stage 1, the text I've selected is The Street Beneath My Feet by Charlotte Gillen and Yovel Zommer. So what this is doing is it's helping us to take our children into this into some of the detail of the layers of the earth going down to the core, and it opens up beautifully. So it's really enticing for children, but it's also giving us lots of information. And then for key stage 2, The Pebble in My Pocket. So you're taking this story of land and rock formation, across the key stages. And I've worked up a ways of thinking about how we might plan for this in stories in geography. So I just want to turn now to the principles of implementation to make sure we've got this thread of ambition going all the way through. And so 3 elements I think it's worth considering. So the first is what we're offering our children, does it privilege thinking over task completion? Are our children just completing worksheets, poor quality worksheets, or are they really thinking about what it is they're learning? I think that we should be offering our children opportunities for them to lead to mastery, not immediately, but over time, where a child can do something on their own terms as a result of what I've taught them. And then finally, is it beautiful? So I don't mean, is it covered in sparkly butterflies? I mean, is it really fit for purpose and high quality? So what I'm arguing is, if we're really true to wanting to keep our curriculum ambitious, we need to look carefully at a lot of the worksheets that are offered to children, which I don't think are sufficiently ambitious. And so what I'm arguing instead is that we go to high quality resources, for instance, in religious education, if we're learning about Islam, from an organization like the Museum with No Frontiers, that offers children this beautiful, rich material that they've got access to, websites like the Khan Academy. So we show the children real, authentic material, in this example, where they're considering Islam and mosques. So there's plenty of high quality resources out there. These are from the British Museum, and many of them also have beautiful resources going with them, as indeed does this project. So if we're teaching about ancient Greek myths, and we're teaching about Demeter and Persephone, then wouldn't it be lovely to show our children the art and the artifacts from the ancient world that relate to that myth? Okay, so always going back to the highest quality we can in order for our children to have deeper learning. And when we go to these high quality resources, for instance, on the British Museum, you've got some lovely background knowledge there as well that's going to help us as teachers. We've got some confidence that these are accurate, they're high quality, because they've been developed by the experts in the field working alongside teachers. So the argument I'm making here, if we want to be truly ambitious in our curriculum, that we go to the authentic sources. And so what I've done is I have pulled together half a dozen resources that go with each of the national curriculum areas as a starting point to make sure that we're following this thread of ambition. So there's plenty more out there, but just to make it manageable. And these are on my website, marymyatt.com, under subject links under the resources. There's one for each of the national curriculum areas to get this conversation going. The other place we can go is subject associations, and this is their bread and butter, so well worth having a look at them. I think if you're leading a subject, you should be a member of your subject association, and the school, I think, should pay. And then the Chartered College as well does some great work, well worth having a look at their work as well. So just to wrap this up, I think we need to be thinking about how we get back on track to pay real attention to the curriculum and asking ourselves what adds greatest value so that we can crack on and do this work. So I think there are some questions we need to ask ourselves. I think we've got to stop trying to do everything. Can't keep doing new things unless we take some other things off. So I think one of the things we can look at, particularly as things calm down after lockdown, is how we use meetings. You know, is it possible to do some reading within the meetings and then the business gets done in an email? To think about marking. So here we've got Dylan Williams saying, you know, it really doesn't make any difference to children's learning. So we could save a lot of time and instead use things like whole class feedback sheets, which plenty of people are doing. To have some conversations about data and rethink how we talk about progress in the curriculum, and what are some of the evidence we might have that would show whether what we've taught our children has had any impact. We need to think now of the curriculum itself being the progression model. So I have taught it, have my children got it? How do I know? So it's as simple as that, rather than points and levels type language. So what are some of the things that children might produce that was going to give me evidence that they have taught, that they've learned what I've taught them? So it could be a result of some low stakes quizzes, which don't need to go into any spreadsheet. But if I'm giving children regular low stakes quizzes, I can tell from their responses whether they're learning what I've intended. Excuse me. Then what children say gives us insights into whether they've learned it. Then extended writing, or other things as well. So we might take a leaf out of Paul Watson's book. He's a senior leader at the North Ormsby Academy, and have a look at what can be produced through double page spreads. So this is an opportunity for children to really demonstrate their learning to the highest level. And indeed, Paul has done a recording which is freely available on Myatt & Co, where he talks through this process. So we move away from worksheets which children are just filling in the blanks, to providing them with opportunities for them really to demonstrate what they know. And then we look at Austin's Butterfly, a very well-known film about how to set up peer feedback to develop a child's piece of work. This is from Ron Berger, and I've just taken a screenshot from the end there, which is evident that over a number of lessons, Austin has made progress. It's evident in the work itself. So this is about taking the time to do fewer things in greater depth, to do them well, to move away from the idea of the curse of content coverage, so we can get to a place of true depth with our children, truly ambitious. We might also use things like comparative judgment, and standardized assessments can be helpful as well. But let's remember, colleagues, as we go about this work, thinking about an ambitious curriculum, that we pace ourselves. You know, it is important work, but it's long-term work. So don't try and do it all at once. Think about how we get into this rich stuff and then offer it to our children, and making sure that we find the time and the space to do that. And to remember that we're human beings first, we're professionals second, that we really want to enjoy this work and give it to our children. And to remember that our children are human beings first and their learners second. So I hope that's helpful, colleagues. Some thoughts on the curriculum, and best of luck with everything that you're doing.